All right, it's time to get into the waiver wire picks here, heading into week 4. Week 4, man. Justin Boone, we are flying here through the NFL season. Let's get into the quarterback position. Who are we picking up this week?
Well, overall this week, I will say it's a little more interesting on the waiver wire. I always want to be honest with everyone, and there's been some boring waiver wire weeks so far. This one, a little more interesting, so I think people got to open up the wallet and actually make some plays. Now, quarterback, not necessarily the spot that you're going to do that. There isn't really a standout name here. We're going to have to watch to see if Jaden Daniels is going to be healthy enough to play, because if he's not, Marcus Mariota, he's only 6% rostered. He's going against the Falcons this week. If he gets another start, he's a guy that's like a borderline QB1. And we talked about Mac Jones and Marcus Mariota last week and who should you play. I'm going to give you props here again, Harmon. You said Mariota over Mac Jones. And later in the week, when there were the injuries in the 49ers receiving core, I came around on that. And in the end, I had Mariota ranked much higher. But you nailed that one from the jump. Mariota comes out. He has the rushing production, right? 40 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground against the Raiders. Finished with over 20 fantasy points, was well inside the top 10 on the week. And we'll see if Daniels is back. And the report today was that he's still day to day. And when you see Mariota come out and play fairly well and keep things moving, why would you rush Jaden Daniels back? So keep an eye out there. If Mariota's around, if Daniels isn't playing, he would probably be the top guy to pick up and play this week. We could look a little further down here. Geno Smith, 28% rostered. He's going against the Bears. And I mean, he's finished as a top 15 fantasy quarterback in 2 of his 3 games with the Raiders. It hasn't necessarily been super pretty, and yet the production is still there. I mentioned it earlier, like this week, right? It didn't look great. And then in garbage time, boom, he comes through. 3 touchdowns when it's all said and done. Ends up with the 3rd most fantasy points among quarterbacks for the week, at least heading into the Monday nighter. And listen, he's not the kind of guy that I'm suggesting is going to win you a week. He's not a superstar, but fantasy-wise, he can be like that seat filler for you, can give you a solid floor versus a banged-up Bears defense next week. So Geno's going to be a QB2 streamer option there. And then there's others, like we could talk about guys like Matthew Stafford against the Colts. You can keep an eye on Mac Jones or Tyrod Taylor. We'll see if Brock Purdy or, we'll see if those guys, Justin Fields, are going to be back. Not sure if they're going to play or not, but there's a lot of like streamer types like that, right? So I'd prefer to go a little deeper and talk about a guy that I think could have some long-term value. I've suggested him in the waiver wire column as somebody that you might want to stash because eventually he's going to start. Well, that eventually could be coming a lot sooner than we expect. Jackson Dart on the Giants, 5% rostered. And we've just seen, Russell Wilson, we've gotten the full experience. He had that out of body game in week 2 where he just goes nuts, puts up the 2nd most fantasy points among quarterbacks on the week. And then in week 3 struggles again. And I saw Adam Schefter tweeted out this afternoon that Brian Dable left the door open for a potential quarterback change in week 4. So whether it's week 4, whether it's beyond, Jackson Dart, his time is coming here. And I wonder, even if they want to put him out there this week, whether they just wait one more week because they're going against the Chargers defense. Maybe not the best spot to put your rookie quarterback out there. But the week after, they get the Saints. So that would be maybe a nice spot to get them out in the field. So I think that is, a great pickup. If you're talking about someone long-term that could emerge as like a true fantasy starter, we know he can run the ball a little bit. He's somebody that you could grab right now and stash and see either what he looks like this week if he starts, or you got him for when he does eventually get under center.
Can't look much worse than it did on Sunday night for the New York Giants. So there is that. Geno is interesting to me, man, because that Bears match, like I did expect the Cowboys to put it on the Bears a little bit more than they did. That being said, they did lose their number 1 wide receiver earlier in that game. And CeeDee Lamb sounds like he's going to miss like 3 to 4 weeks, which I'm sure we'll talk about more here over the course of this week. But again, maybe the Bears defense is coalescing a little bit around Dennis Allen in that scheme, but I am skeptical. I'm very skeptical of this whole like Raiders operation. So maybe that's like hanging me up on Geno Smith. And I would definitely like if Jaden Daniels doesn't play, I definitely would rather have Marcus Mariota than Geno Smith. But I hear you, and I'm trying to put my biases aside that he is a decent little pickup off the waiver wire.
It's when you get to that range of like streamer options, none of them are strong options, right? Like I said, Matthew Stafford against the Colts. How do you feel about that? Like it's all those guys in that range where you're kind of just picking and choosing. No one really stands out. So again, we're not spending big on any of these quarterbacks, but there is a running back this week that I am willing to empty the entire wallet on. and that is Trey Benson on the Cardinals. And normally I won't even write up guys that are over the 50% rostered mark. That's the cutoff that I use in the column. And yet for this one, I made an exception. He's 52% rostered. It is awful that this comes at the expense of James Conner getting injured. James Conner's been a good fantasy starter for a long time. Seems like an awesome dude, has had a great career. And now you worry on the other side of the season-ending injury. What does that mean for him when you think about dynasty, when you think about just him getting back on the field and being able to do anything else? I hope he comes back next season. I hope he comes back strong. And yet you look at this scenario, and this is why they drafted Trey Benson. And this year so far, Benson's actually looked like the more effective runner, I think, right? He's looked like the more explosive option. He's been out producing Conner, right? Conner, he managed 96 scrimmage yards on 28 touches. Benson, 119 yards on just 16 attempts. Connor's the one that was finding the end zone. So fantasy-wise, it looked a little bit better for him. But you watch those games, Benson looked like the guy who could actually maybe help this offense a little more this season. So now he's going to step into this lead back role. He's going to get the bulk of the snaps, the bulk of the touches. Amari DeMercado, he'll spell him a little bit on passing downs, but this immediately puts Benson into that fantasy RB2 conversation, a top 24 weekly option. And there's not going to be many situations, like I said, where I am just going to go all out. I am aggressive on the waiver wire. I've said that before, but to go all out, to empty the entire fab budget on one guy, it can be risky. And yet, how many opportunities do you get during a season to get a guy who could be a top 20, top 24 starter at a position? We know this is one of them. Don't hold back. Go out and get Benson if he's still out there. We look a little further down, like to the real waiver wire pickups, the guys who might be available in more competitive leagues. Blake Corum is somebody that I've talked about now for a little while. Harmon, I think everybody should be checking out this deep stashes column that I do on Thursdays, because it has already been helpful uncovering a few guys before they became waiver wire pickups the next week. And Corum was the one that I featured last week. And that was after Kyren Williams snaps. They went down a little bit the week before, right? Was playing on 82% of the snaps in week 1. That dropped to around 70% in week 2. Sean McVay comes out and says, hey, I want a 65-35 split here. And he said stuff like that before. So you take it with a grain of salt, but we just notched it as another data point. And they didn't quite hit that mark this week. It was 75-25 still in snaps. But Corum continuing to be productive on his touches, getting more involved in the receiving game. Now he's up to 97 yards and a touchdown over his last 2 games. He's coming on as a potential flex option. And this is a guy that we weren't even sure was going to be the number 2 back. And producer Colin, shout out to him. He was all in on Corum. I was in the Jarquez Hunter backfield. I was thinking he was going to be the one that could step up here. This is Corum is the clear number 2 in that Rams backfield here. And if he has that flex value, you add that to the league-winning upside if something happens to Kyren Williams, and you have a player that just needs to be rostered in way more than 17% of leagues. So really like Corum as a pickup. I think he needs to be rostered everywhere. Some other guys that I think you could pick up this week, and now we're getting a little further down, but Ollie Gordon on the Dolphins, right? We saw his playing time headed in the right direction. We talked earlier about Travis Hunter. It's going in the wrong direction for him. Well, Ollie Gordon, his is moving up. He got 9 carries this week, turned him into 38 yards and a TD. You wish the Dolphins offense as a whole was looking a little bit better, so you could make the case that maybe they go back to having 2 productive fantasy backs in that offense. I don't know that that's going to be the case week in and week out, but again, this is another back that's showing that he could have some flex value as the bigger back in that offense, maybe the goal line guy. And I think he would be a pretty clear RB2 if Devon Achane ever got hurt there. So I really like those options. Woody Marks is another one too, and we're going to set a record here for times we're bringing up producer Colin, but before the season, producer Colin told me he went out and made a trade to get Woody Marks in Dynasty. He was very excited about it. The season starts, and Woody Marks was playing like behind Dario Gunbowale. Was not even getting used that much, but this is another guy where the usage is headed in the right direction. 11% of the snaps, 27% of the snaps, 48% of the snaps this week. He has passed Gunbowale. He's passed Dameon Pierce. And now he is that guy behind Nick Chubb, and a guy, considering Nick Chubb's age and injury history, makes him a little more interesting, but also somebody that can get involved in the passing game. And he is out there in 90% of leagues. So he is certainly worth stashing. And then another guy that I want to highlight as a stash here. We talk sometimes about these, IR stashes. You could go pick them up on the waiver wire, throw them in the IR spot, and then go pick up somebody else. Tajay Spears. Do not forget about Tajay Spears. You don't have to really spend much time on this one because Tajay Spears is somebody I think we talked about a lot in the summer as an intriguing candidate, a guy that you hope would carve out a bigger role in that backfield and be the number 2 behind Tony Pollard. and yet an injury occurs. He was out at the start of the season, but he is going to be back, we think, in a few weeks here. And when he comes back, he's going to go right back to that role. No one else in that Titans backfield has stepped up. He is going to go right back to that role and maybe be able to carve out some touches alongside Tony Pollard while giving you that upside if anything happens to Pollard during the season.
I do want to double back just to Trey Benson because I think he's going to be a big talking point this week. I maybe have a touch more skepticism on Trey Benson than you do, immediately being like a running back to, well, I don't want to say like every week start. I'm not trying to paint you into that corner that's what you said, but like kind of in that running back 2 range. I don't know, man. I think so far what we've seen, and look, I have Trey Benson on a dynasty team. I actually would love for me to be very wrong with everything I'm about to say right now. But I think he hasn't really shown consistently in the NFL, like the little nuances that you want to see from like a true like high touch back. And even if you go back to Florida State, like he wasn't necessarily that guy. He was more of like a slasher, change of pace, big play option. And I think he was complimenting James Conner really well in that role so far this year. But man, Conner is so important to this Arizona Cardinals offense. And I actually think the run game in Arizona has not looked good this year. I think they missed Clayton Adams, who flew the coop to be the offensive coordinator. He was their offensive line coach, run game coordinator, flew the coop to Dallas to be their offensive coordinator. And I think their run game has actually looked pretty well designed so far. Their offensive line talent is mid at best. The whole offense is maybe mid at best, as we talked about with some of the Marvin Harrison Jr. concerns. So I come away from that game on Sunday, and I said this to Chris Allen yesterday on the show. I just don't even know if the Cardinals are good. And like, they don't have to be good for Trey Benson to be good in fantasy, but I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical about Trey Benson being one of those guys that immediately goes to like, quote, league winner status from, this kind of area of the waiver wire. But there's no question that if he is out there, he's still somebody that you're emptying the wallet on, because he absolutely deserves that.
Yeah, I'm not looking at him like, even necessarily like a top 10 guy or anything like that. Nothing like, we saw James Conner at his height, but I'm looking at him as somebody that if Conner wasn't there in those first few games, those 28 touches that he got, how much of that goes to Benson and how much of that goes to Amari Demercado or anyone else? I think Benson's getting a lot of that. Like, I don't think this is going to turn into like a 50-50 split with Amari Demercado. So I think Benson's going to pick up the volume. And even if he's not as good as Conner was, even though this year, I do think like he looked like the better back. But I think he's going to get there on volume. And you can certainly get yourself into some trouble fantasy-wise by just banking on volume. We talked about Chase Brown and how when the scenario changes and you're hoping for that volume and you're hoping for them to come through that way, how it can really, you can fall on your face there. But I think Benson is going to be a good player who's going to get the volume now. That's going to boost up his stats and RB2 status. He'll have some RB1 weeks, but RB2 status, which I think does make him an every week starter, but not necessarily a true league winner. All right. So we talked about, the potential of guys being league winners, who is, who isn't. You don't normally get a league winner at receiver, right? You end up often just picking from guys that are going to be bye week fill-ins or injury fill-ins, flex types. And there's a lot of guys like that. So you don't want to spend too much in this spot, but there's somebody that I want to talk about here, and I want to get your thoughts on it too, because this is more of a long-term play. And yet this is a guy that I think could turn into somebody that might be a difference maker for your fantasy team. And that's Luther Burden in Chicago. Only 11% rostered. Not somebody that I'm looking to start in week 4. We just got a glimpse of like maybe what that ceiling could kind of offer if his role continues to grow. Ben Johnson said that he wanted to start getting Burden more involved. And that's exactly what happened in week 3, right? He caught 3 passes, 101 yards and a score. He gained another 7 yards on the ground. I will caution that he only played 29% of the snaps. So he's far from a full-time player. That's why I'm saying this is more of a long-term thing. Until that playing time just increases significantly here, from a fantasy scoring perspective, it's going to be very sporadic. You're not going to get performances like we got last week. But the way I see it, there's just, so few waiver wire wide receivers that could potentially challenge the kind of upside that I see from Burton here. I know you've suggested the possibility of like DJ Moore being traded at some point. Maybe that's a little less likely after the big win on Sunday, but I do think Burton is going to carve out a bigger role over time here. That kind of makes him like a high price stash. Not that I'm saying you need to spend a lot to go get him, but somebody that you're going to want to spend a little more on. I think I have him right now recommended at a 7% bid, which is probably a little bit high. And yet still, I'm saying that because I think he's somebody that could potentially come on down the road and actually make a difference. So I'll pause there, Harmon. I want to get your thoughts on Burton.
Okay. I'm glad you want to talk about this because I think this is really interesting too. I think when we were asked at some point, maybe it was on this show. I don't know. We there's so much damn content, but like for a stash, and I said Luther Burton is one that is a good candidate because he is, I think, somebody that could pop in the second half of the season, especially as the Bears offense is trending in the right direction. Now, people are going to look at the fantasy point totals and obviously the 100 yards on the touchdown and that signature play on the pitch back from DeAndre Swift where he scores that monster touchdown. I think like, okay, yeah, Luther Burton got a promotion. He actually did not get any sort of playing time bump at all. In week 1, 17 offensive snaps, 9 routes. In week 2, 11 snaps, 5 routes. In week 3, 17 snaps, 9 routes. Route participation's 31%, which is the highest so far, but it's not like a big bump. Okay. So he is still stuck as the 4th receiver on this team. I still think Boone, that they drafted it for now. I still think that they drafted him to be DJ Moore's replacement, not like take Olamide Zaccheaus's kind of, middling little slot job at some point. Also worth noting, Colson Loveland picked up a serious injury. I know you're going to talk about, Cole Kmet later on here in the tight end section, but that might be a reason that they're going to play less 12 personnel. They play more 11 personnel. Maybe we do get more Luther Burton in the mix in that particular scenario. But yeah, if they are making Luther Burton an outside receiver, I actually kind of think that's really good for him in Dynasty. I think he makes more sense as like a flanker, like a DJ Moore replacement than like a slot player. So he is purely a stash, but if this Bears offense is ticking upward, like I think we have seen promise like built upon from week 1 to week 2 to week 3, then Burton could be a guy in the second half of the season, not unlike when St. Brown as a rookie was a late season guy for the Detroit Lions. Obviously, Ben Johnson was not the offensive coordinator there, but he was a little bit more empowered as the play caller, not the play caller, but more involved in the offense in St. Brown's rookie season after they let go of Anthony Lynn that year in Detroit.
Okay. So good notes there. I think, still looking at him, like I said, as like a longer term pickup here, somebody that we're still stashing. We're not grabbing him and hoping
you can't
for that
play him
production
next
last
week, right?
But
like, you can't.
And I will say the Colston Loveland injury doesn't really sound like it's that serious. Apparently the update today is that he might even have a chance to play this week. It's a hip issue. So yeah, hopefully he's healthy and there's no worries there. But we'll keep an eye on that one as the week goes along here. Now, I want to talk about the receiver who had just a massive game, the biggest fantasy game from a receiver this year. And yet I want to just like tamp down the expectations moving forward on him a little bit. That is Trey Tucker on the Raiders. Like the fact that he's had 2 pretty good fantasy games so far, that's great. I think he's just still going to be the same kind of player where he's playing a ton. So we'll give him that. He is like a full-time player in this offense. That is awesome, right? Playing over 90% of the snaps, has these 2 strong fantasy games. And yet I think he's just going to be a volatile guy for fantasy. So you go out, you pick him up, you don't spend much to get him. You use him if you need to. We'll have bye weeks coming up. Injuries are certainly hitting. Maybe get him in your lineup as like that flex, but he's always going to be that volatile flex. I don't see him emerging as a player who's going to consistently be putting up strong stats. We'll give you a chance at the end to talk about that because I want to mention a few other receivers here that are kind of in the same range. But Trey Tucker is somebody you can certainly go add this week. Just don't get overly excited about that huge game in week 3. Darnell Mooney, he came back. We talked about the Falcons offense earlier. He's 45% rostered, so he's up near that cutoff, but starting to get back in the mix. 4 catches, 44 yards this week. It was on 11 targets, right? So the efficiency, not great, but he's coming back from the injury, so hopefully knocks the rust off, and I think we'll see some better stat lines from him moving forward. Troy Franklin, I'll bring him up again. We talked about him last week, and this is why I said what I said about Trey Tucker, where these guys who, yes, they're getting the playing time, but are they going to get the consistent targets week in and week out? I hope that Franklin does become more of a consistent player, but right now the usage is strong, but the actual production is going to be a little spotty here and there. So it was unfortunate that he took a step back and that, you had Courtland Sutton have the big game this week, but he ran almost as many routes as Courtland Sutton. It was just 2 fewer routes this week. So that's worth noting. Moving forward, though, he's another wide receiver 4 flex option. So is Alec Iamaner. Man, this dude, he was one of the first ones that I hit on in that deep stash column. basically just matching Calvin Ridley's production so far, which is incredible from a day 3 receiver. Scoring touchdowns, doing it all. Not insane stats so far, but really, really good for a day 3 pick. So he remains on the flex radar. Christian Kirk, who we talked about earlier, 34% rostered. He came back this week, first week of action back, 67% of the snaps, 8 targets. He's somebody that's a vet who could grow into the role that he's had in the past where he can be productive. And then a stash guy, I'll just mention Jalen Coker. We talked about him last week, but Jalen Coker's on IR. Yeah, another one of these players that you go out, you put him in your IR spot, and you benefit down the road.
Yeah, I thought it was encouraging that Franklin was still on the field a good bit. So I'm with you that that's more important to me than the production. And if you're a dynasty buyer, if you're kind of bullish on Franklin, that's more important than the production. Trey Tucker definitely felt pretty fluky. Commander secondary, a little bit of garbage time, but he's actually, I think, played all right this year. Did a little charting on him, and he's fast. I'll give him that. He is absolutely a fast player. Not a lot else to talk about, though, in terms of the rest of his game. Let's quickly hit on tight ends. It's a lot of the same names that we've hit so far this year, so I'll let you rip on these ones.
Yeah, we don't need to spend any time on Harold Fannin Jr. I've made my case on him, but somehow he's still just 47% rostered, so he's still out
just
there
pick him up,
leagues.
People. Pick him up so Boone doesn't
I don't
want to
have to talk about him next week. Go and get him. The guy that I want to highlight is Isaiah Likely, and he was somebody else that I talked about in that deep stashes column last week. He's on track, I think, to return in week 4. We still haven't seen the Ravens play this week. They play Monday night. We're recording this just before the Monday nighter. So we'll see what happens in that game in terms of Mark Andrews. But Mark Andrews so far, so disappointing. 1 catch each week, 7 yards total this season, no touchdowns. Maybe he'll turn it around and come out and have a big game, and that'll change our outlook on this one. But right now, I'm projecting that Isaiah Likely is going to come back and take on a big role in this offense and potentially pass Mark Andrews as the starter as the season goes along. So you go and get him, you stash him for now. If you're looking for a streamer in week 4, though, Brenton Strange, 25% rostered, hasn't found the end zone, but he's playing a ton. 2 decent fantasy games so far, 4 for 59 in the opener, 6 for 61 this past week. Diami Brown's banged up in the receiver core. I think that could actually help Brenton Strange. So think about him. And then Chika Okonkwo. Chika Okonkwo very quietly putting up okay stats in that Titans offense. Okay stats for the Titans offense, I should say, I suppose. But 5 for 66 in week 3. Another guy you could consider as a streaming option. And yeah, you mentioned that Cole Kmet could be a potential streamer this week. That's if Colston Loveland is out. We've seen Kmet come up, be a fantasy starter in the past. Maybe he could do that again if Loveland's not out there this week.
All right, Boone, real quickly, give us a deep sleeper on the waiver wire. And I don't even need to back you up on this one because people know what I think about this player.
Yeah, I know you like this guy. Another day 3 rookie, already a contributor. Torrey Horton on the Seahawks. Touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. Just clocked his highest route share this season at 76%. And what happens if Cooper Kupp falls off as the year goes along and Torrey Horton takes over that number 2 job? So very intriguing as a deep sleeper who is available in 98% of leagues. Go get him.